Okay, so another principle of progressive overload is our duration or our density. Again, to reiterate the definition of that it's the amount of workload that we perform in an allotted amount of time. So in order to progressively overload with our density, we have to do the same amount of workload in a shorter amount of time or more workload in the same amount of time. So a good way to measure that, say we've got 120 seconds rest between all of our sets on all 3 of our days. That's for day 1, day 3, as well as day 6. If we wanted to progressive overload, say we keep the volume the exact same, so referring back to our day 1, say we were doing our 9,000 pounds of volume, we are lifting 100 pounds with all of our movements there, with 120 seconds rest between all of our sets. We then can lower that down, say we subtract 30 seconds, and now we are doing all of our movements with 90-second rest time as opposed to our 120-second rest time. We're still achieving that 9,000 pounds of volume, but instead we're doing it in a shorter amount of time. So say within this workout, it takes us 30 minutes to complete this entire workout. Instead, by shortening our rest time, maybe we're walking out the door in 20 to 25 minutes instead, doing the same amount of workload in less amount of time. Density. All right, now we're diving into intensity. Intensity is probably the most intricate of all of the different principles of progressive overload, so it's going to be pretty difficult to generalize, but for the sake of this video, I'll try my best to do so. Within our part 2 of progressive overload, we will dive deeper into the intricacies of intensity. But again, for the sake of this video, we'll generalize it the best we can. So again, to define intensity, that can be referred to as how heavy we load up our specific movements. So this can be measured 2 different ways, via RPE scale or via percentage of max. So what are those? When it comes to our RPE scale, RPE stands for rating of perceived exertion, or in other words, how physically exerting the movement is, how it felt to you that given day. So when it comes to our RPE scale, a good way to understand what the different numbers are, it's scaled from 1 through 10. For the sake of this example, we have our programmed week 1 at an RPE of 7. So what is RPE 7? How does RPE 7 feel? If we're here, a good way to understand what perceived exertion of 7 is, with that, it would be about, maybe we finish our set and we've got about 3 reps left in the tank, say. So it was fairly easy, wasn't super easy, but if you went all the way out as hard as you could have maybe gotten 3 more reps there. Or, a good way to understand it, 10, RPE 10, that's your absolute maximum. There's no way you would have been able to get 1 more rep at that given weight. If we're RPE 1, we could go all day at that weight, no problem. No physical exertion, or no overall exertion going on at 1. So, with this program, we're sitting about 7 for our week 1. With that, we've got maybe about 3 reps in the tank. We rep it out, it's fairly difficult, but we're not absolutely struggling, or we're not absolutely diving down super hard within our fatigue. A good way to progressive overload with our intensity, say week 1, we have RPE 7. Now we dive into week 2, we push ourselves a little bit harder to an RPE 8. So now, maybe we're pushing ourselves to where we've got about 2 reps left in the tank, where it's heavier than it was the week prior. We're getting a little more volume because we upped the intensity, upped the overall perceived exertion, and the bar weight that we are using is heavier. So this is a more generalized way to understand it, especially if you're a beginner. If you're a beginner within the sport or within weightlifting itself, you're not going to understand what your percentage of max is. And your overall percentage of max is always going to be something that's somewhat generalized off of RPE. These can play off of one another very well, actually. So when it comes to the percentage of max, just to understand what that is and overall how we measure percentage of max, say we come into the gym, we want to test what our overall 1 rep max is on the squat. Say we come in and our max is 100 pounds. And within our program, we're set to train a certain set rep scheme at 80% of our max. We then would take 80% of 100 pounds. For simple math, that would just be 80 pounds, and that then is going to be our working weight. Now, if we wanted to progressively overload with our percentage of max. Say 1 week we're working with 80% of our max, which is at 100 pounds for a certain set rep scheme. And we did 80 pounds week 1. Now week 2, we do 85% of our max. Now we've got 85 pounds on the bar for the same set rep scheme. It's a little bit more difficult. That perceived exertion should be a little bit more difficult because now the weight on the bar is a little bit heavier, and ultimately we're doing more than we did the week prior. So more details with intensity is going to come in part 2. We're going to dive a lot deeper into the overall neurological coding and how to decipher which percentage we want to be working at and why for the given set and rep schemes that we have set. But again, for the sake of generalization, this is what we're basing it off of, our real basic stimulus that we touched on within the beginning of the video. We'll dive a lot deeper into within part 2. All right, this is part 2 of our basics to programming. In this video, we went over the implementation of progressive overload. Again, bear in mind, this is a real generalized way of doing so. It's real kind of straightforward just to get you an idea as to how these principles are implemented. Now, within further videos, we're going to dive a lot deeper into the intricacies of them. Intensity is something that you guys may still have a little bit of fuzzy spots in your mind as to how to implement them within your own programming. Don't worry there. Within our next video, we will be diving a lot deeper into that. We'll be getting into neurological coding, speed strength, strength speed, explosive power, all those different things and how we can implement the proper set rep schemes to achieve our desired stimulus. Again, this stimulus that we have written down here is real generalized. We're going to get into the bigger intricacies of that within our next video. Again, this has been Tate with Train to Win. Thank you for watching.